Let's look at Anthony Ryder from South Lyon, Michigan, recently selected as the Lions 2020 Fan of the Year. He has a passion about sports broadcasting.
With the 112th selection in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver, USC. One pride, baby! Yeah! What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Detroit Lions video. Now, the NFL Draft is in less than a week. A week from today, we will have new stars, new players, and new things to talk about as Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell will complete their second NFL draft of their tenure in Detroit. And Detroit will finally all be back on the same page, and all the fans can go from disagreeing with each other to finally just having the one consensus goal of hoping the Lions win some football games. But the Detroit Lions are not the only team in the NFL. And just as we did a season ago, today we are going to go over all 32 teams, go over the entirety of the first round of this year's NFL draft, and go through a mock on what I believe will happen within the first 32 picks, setting up, of course, the second and third days of the NFL draft for these teams to get some talent. So this video is, of course, not necessarily focused on the Detroit Lions, but I do want to just mention that this video is, to the best of my ability, unbiased. I tried to think of what was the best thing for each and every individual team based off of their strengths, based off of their weaknesses, based off of what they've done in free agency, based off of what their roster looks like right now. And I think I came to a pretty good conclusion. I think I really helped set up all 32 teams for future success. Now, I am aware that there are likely going to be trades within the first round, and I will mention if I believe a trade is possible, but I did not go through trades in this mock draft, as I just believe at that point it gets a little bit too messy when you do 32 teams. Every team's able to trade. I think it just gets a little too messy, and I think sticking with the original 32 picks is the best way to go about this. So without any further ado, let's get right on in to this mock draft. Now, starting off with the number 1 overall selection, the Jacksonville Jaguars, although Pro Football Focus says that their needs are defensive line, linebacker, and safety, I believe the Jaguars addressed the offensive line first, and I 100% believe that Ikem Ekwonu, the tackle from North Carolina State, will be the first selection in the 2022 class. He is, by a lot of people's standards, the best overall prospect in this year's class. He is the best overall prospect in this year's draft. And quite honestly, he's my best player. And if the Lions needed a tackle, if they needed offensive line help in the slightest, I would say Ikem Ekwonu would be one of the biggest targets for the Detroit Lions, just like Penei Sewell was a season ago. But Ikem Ekwonu, I think, is the best player in this class, has a great ceiling. He is the Penei Sewell of this class. And I think the Jaguars will put this pick in pretty early. It won't take a lot of thought. It won't take a lot of arguing. I think Ikem Ekwonu is the pick at number 1. Now, this pick is going to be controversial because as a Lions fan, I know that there are a lot of differing opinions on what should happen at the second overall pick, whether it should be Aiden Hutchinson, Charles Cross, Ahmad Gardner, Evan Neal, Kayvon Thibodeaux, Kyle Hamilton, Malik Willis. There's a ton of different options. There's a ton of different routes the Detroit Lions can go, but I truly believe that Kyle Hamilton will be the second overall pick in this year's class. I know the Detroit Lions very recently signed Deshaun Elliott to be a starting safety in this roster, but at the end of the day, the safety position is far from filled, and it is far from complete on this Lions roster, right? Their third biggest need is defensive back, and although I don't agree with the quarterback need, I do agree with the defensive back and linebacker needs the Lions are facing this offseason, and all it's going to take is one injury, one bad step, one bad tackle, one blindside block, one false negative or one false positive COVID test, and one of our safeties is going to be out for a long long time. They're going to miss time this season, and I'm not confident going into the season saying both of our starting safeties are going to play every single snap of every single game. They won't get fatigued. They won't get injured. They won't get nicked up. They won't miss any time at all. They will play every snap of every game of the entire season. That's not realistic. So going with Kyle Hamilton, the player that I believe has the fewest red flags out of all of the major options for the Detroit Lions, addressing the biggest need with the best player in the class. Kyle Hamilton is my second graded player in this class and the highest graded player that the Lions can realistically take. I think Kyle Hamilton is the best option. The edge rushers on the Detroit Lions are fine. You can survive with Romeo Okwara, Charles Harris, Julian Okwara, and Austin Bryant as your pass rushers, right? Jared Davis came in as a blitzing linebacker. You can scheme up pressures. The Lions did it last year. They got a lot of pressures. They were actually top half of the NFL in pressures a season ago, but one of the big reasons they didn't lead the league in sacks was because the secondary could not hold up long enough, and a big part of that was the safety play. I think Kyle Hamilton single-handedly changes the secondary, gives our pass rushers more time to get to the quarterback, and I think he will be the best player for the Detroit Lions, fit-wise, scheme-wise, and at the end of the day, you can scheme up pressure on the defensive line. You cannot scheme up takeaways. So I'm going to take the most talented player at the position that's hardest to scheme for, and I'm going to take a better athlete later in the class that I can scheme up pressures with. I can scheme up stunts and blitzes and pressures and sacks. I can scheme that stuff up with athletes. I can't scheme up takeaways from the secondary, right? I mean, yes, you can shift post-snap, right? You can have post-snap coverage opposed to pre-snap coverage, but you can't scheme takeaways and you can't scheme turnovers in the same way you can scheme pressure. So at the end of the day, I'm taking the best player at the hardest position to scheme for, and I'm taking the best player to improve this Lions team right off the bat. Now, getting onto the Houston Texans, this is extremely disrespectful by PFF, saying that they need every single position. I don't think they need every single position, but there are a lot of places that they could go right in this class. And although the offensive line is not horrible, I do believe Evan Neal, the tackle from I do believe that Evan Neal, the tackle from Alabama, will be the third overall pick. I think that the Houston Texans are almost completely starting over. They don't have a lot of foundational pieces. They are not a very good football team. They need a home run hit with this first overall pick, and their best odds of doing so are Evan Neal. He is arguably the tackle one in this class. You pair him with Laremy Tunsil, you move the right tackle inside the guard where a lot of Texans fans thinks he fits even better at that position, and you have the makings of a fairly solid offensive line to protect Davis Mills if you don't address the quarterback position later in this draft. I think that with this pick solidifying the offensive line and really setting a solid foundation on the front seven and the front five on offense, you're setting up your rebuild for a very good start, just like the Detroit Lions did with Penei Sewell a season ago. Now, the New York Jets are on the clock, and in a very Robert Saleh-esque move, they are going to go with an edge rusher as Aiden Hutchinson, the edge rusher from Michigan, goes at number 4 overall. Aiden Hutchinson, although I don't think he will reach the ceiling of a Nick or Joey Bosa, there are comparisons to those two players in Aiden Hutchinson, and there are things I see about those two guys, and there are things about Aiden Hutchinson that I see from both of the Bosa brothers. I think both Bosas are better coming out of college, but I don't think Aiden Hutchinson at the beginning of his career is going to be far behind where either Bosa brother was. Robert Saleh drafted Nick Bosa, and Nick Bosa became the defensive rookie of the year and a staple of the 49ers defense. He was a huge part in what helped the 49ers reach the Super Bowl in 2019, and I believe that Aiden Hutchinson is that next Nick Bosa for Robert Saleh, right? They have Quinnen Williams on that line. They have, I believe, now Carl Nassib on that line as well, or one other, decent pass rusher that's relatively young still with some upside. They can add Aiden Hutchinson to a defensive line with Quinnen Williams. Quinnen Williams, pushes that pocket in from the interior. Aiden Hutchinson flies around the edge. It'd be a very good defensive line combo, and it would remind me a lot of how Robert Saleh built up his defense and built up a Super Bowl caliber team in San Francisco. Now, the New York Giants are on the clock, and just like the teams before them, I believe that they are in a fairly long-term rebuild. They are looking to get rid of Saquon Barkley. They're looking to get rid of James Bradbury. They're looking to move on from a lot of their veterans. And offensive line, I think, is the biggest need, with Nate Solder not playing a great season a year ago and just not looking like a great offensive tackle. Right? Their top tackle that they took from Georgia a few seasons ago is starting to develop into his own just a little bit, but I think adding another really good tackle on the other side of him would give Danny Dimes, would give Daniel Jones some of the best protection possible in this year's draft. And I think the best way to start a rebuild, and I think the best way to start off where the Giants are right now, is to solidify the offensive line, and they can do that with the second big-time tackle prospect in Charles Cross. You get your quarterback some protection, you give him the weapons that he needs, you give him no excuse next season to not succeed, and then if you're Brian Daboll, you go one season with Daniel Jones. If it works out, if you can develop him, then you're great, and if not, you move on to the next quarterback, and you give that quarterback weapons in Kenny Golladay, Sterling Shepard. You give him a good offensive line with the two tackles, and hopefully maybe even build a little bit more on it next year. I know they were interested in tackles in free agency. They didn't end up landing the big name, but Charles Cross is one of the best players in this class. I think he also goes top 5 to the New York Giants. Now, Carolina is on the board, and although a lot of people think they will go quarterback, I think they're going to go a defensive route. Matt Rule is a defensively minded head coach. In his first draft with the Carolina Panthers, he drafted 7 straight defensive players in a row. And in his first draft with the Carolina Panthers, they drafted 0 offensive players. I think that they can survive with Sam Darnold at quarterback. Although a lot of people think Sam is very bad, I have heard quotes saying that Sam Darnold is their guy, that they don't necessarily want to move on from Sam Darnold right away, and I think they can survive with Sam Darnold for one more season. I think that Matt Rule wants to go defense. I think Matt Rule wants to get a great edge rusher, and after losing Hassan Reddick a season ago, their biggest impact player in the front 7 is no longer there. I think they look to replace that, and I think they go Kayvon Thibodeau, the edge rusher out of Oregon. I think he would slide in immediately and replace Hassan Reddick, who just left for the Philadelphia Eagles. I think it's a really good one-for-one transition. I think Matt Rule wants the best defensive player available, and at this point in the draft, I believe that best player is Kayvon Thibodeau. Now, the Giants are back up on the board at the 7th overall pick. And with this pick, as they did go offensive line in the first pick, I think they're going to address the secondary in this position, right? Ahmad Gardner is the best cornerback, is the best secondary player arguably in this draft, hasn't given up a touchdown in his entire college career, was one of the best cornerbacks in college football for 4 straight seasons. And with the Giants looking to get younger at a position and replacing James Bradbury, likely to trade him either on draft night or before the draft officially arrives, I do believe Ahmad Gardner could be the pick here. Slide neutrally from a older cornerback to a younger cornerback, really solidify that secondary with the New York Giants, or at least add to a secondary that had some promise a season ago, and continue to build from there. Get one of the top prospects on one of the biggest positions of need for them. I think this is a huge pickup for the New York Giants. Now, the Atlanta Falcons are on the board, and I've talked about this before. I truly believe that the pick for this year's draft, and I really think the pick in this year's class for the Atlanta Falcons will be Malik Willis. Malik Willis is somebody that, has all the physical upside, has all the tools in the world. They just got rid of Matt Ryan. They're looking to move on to that next era of quarterback in Atlanta, and I believe 100%, I believe that Malik Willis is that guy. I think he will develop into a great quarterback in the NFL. Quarterback is their number one need. I don't think Marcus Mariota is their guy. I don't believe that Felipe Franks is their guy. Malik Willis makes sense here. He's the best quarterback in this year's class. The Falcons need a quarterback bad to move on to the next era, and I think that quarterback is Malik Willis. So Malik Willis, although he's not necessarily graded as the highest player in this year's class, he's actually graded fairly low by a lot of people, ranked 30, barely a first-round pick by PFF. He is very easily a first-round quality quarterback, and if the Atlanta Falcons and Arthur Smith can develop him, I think he will be a great quarterback in the NFL for many years to come. So Malik Willis is that pick. We move on to Seattle. Now, Seattle has a lot of big needs, and quarterback cannot really be addressed, right? I wouldn't say there's another quarterback outside of Malik Willis I'd feel comfortable taking inside the top 10, maybe even the top 20. But they do have other needs. The tackle position is a huge need. but there's not really a tackle outside of the big three that I'd feel comfortable drafting inside the top 10. Edge rusher, same story. I think you could potentially go with Travon Walker here, but I'm just not the biggest fan of Travon Walker. I really don't love Travon Walker, as a prospect and as a player. I just think his ceiling, I think his floor is way too low to take with a top 10 pick in this year's class. So that leaves you with cornerback. And I think the Seahawks are going to look to rebuild the Legion of Boom, right? The Legion of Boom is over. They're officially restarting. They're officially rebuilding. And what made them a great defense, what won them a Super Bowl all those years ago, was the secondary. I think Pete Carroll stays with that mindset, stays with that philosophy. And I think they draft Derek Stingley, the cornerback from LSU. Cornerback is a big need on that secondary. Their roster, their secondary is not very good, and they have the opportunity to improve it drastically with this pick in Derek Stingley. Now, New York is back on the clock for the 4th time, but only the 2nd time for the New York Jets, where I believe they will give Zach Wilson extra help in this year's class. They will give him another wide receiving weapon, and that will be Drake London, the wide receiver from USC. Looked at as arguably the best wide receiver in this class, Drake London is a great combination of size, hands, ability, and I think he's subtly good at running routes and creating that subtle separation that not everybody sees on film and not everybody sees on tape. I think he's arguably the best wide receiver in this class, and if he ends up falling to the number 10 overall spot, which some people think he could go even earlier, I believe he will be a great pickup and a great addition for Zach Wilson to throw to in the 2022 NFL season. Now, Washington is on the board, and I think they go offensive line. Their offensive line was not very good a season ago. Quarterback is not really an option here. Linebacker is not really an option here. Their biggest needs are guard and center, and I really think that Tyler Linderbaum, the center from Iowa, will be something incredibly, incredibly special in the NFL. I think that he just has the makings to be an all-pro center. He is that next Creed Humphrey, that next Frank Ragnow. He is the next great center in the NFL. And I believe that Washington, kind of in a similar situation to a lot of other teams in the top 10, aren't really playoff caliber teams anymore. They can develop that offensive line, get healthy on defense. If they find the right quarterback, then great. If they don't find the right quarterback, right, if Carson Wentz doesn't work out, at least you're giving him the best opportunity to succeed with this team. And part of that, it comes with a great offensive line. The last time Carson Wentz was an MVP caliber quarterback, it's because the Eagles gave him a top offensive line in football, and they gave him some really good wide receivers. Terry McLaurin's a great wide receiver. One, you need to give Wentz that protection. Now with this pick, I know people are going to say this is a little biased because it's the first pick of a division rival of a team that I do not like, but I believe if this were to become the case, I think that Travon Walker would become the 12th overall pick to the Minnesota Vikings. Travon Walker undoubtedly has phenomenal upside, right? And if you look at the Vikings' needs right now, it's interior offensive line, edge, and cornerback. I wouldn't take another cornerback super high in this class, not top 15. There's not really another center or an interior offensive lineman to take here. Edge rusher is the biggest need, and I am much higher on Travon Walker than I am on George Karlaftis. I'm a little bit higher on Jermaine Johnson. I'm actually a lot higher on Jermaine Johnson, but I think this is a more Vikings pick. This is a guy with a higher ceiling, and if you're talking about guys with high ceilings, right, I think of I think of Danielle Hunter with the Minnesota Vikings. He's getting older. Everson Griffin is moving on from the Minnesota Vikings. He's getting older. They need a big-time athlete. They need a big-time edge rusher, and I think he just fits the Minnesota Vikings system really, really well. I just think that I think the Vikings would go this route. He's got a lot of upside, and although I don't like him day one, if he can develop properly, he will be a menace in the NFC North, and I think the Vikings are going to be willing to take a chance on somebody with that kind of upside. Now, back with the Houston Texans, we're going to take the other edge rusher that I like. Jermaine Johnson, the edge rusher from Florida State, is the pick here. Jermaine Johnson has been talked about for a while as potentially being a top edge rusher in this class, maybe even going as high as a top 10 pick. I think the Texans address it here. They got a franchise tackle with their first pick, and they're getting a potential franchise pass rusher with their second pick. Their defense hasn't really been the same since they lost J.J. Watt to all those injuries, right? When J.J. was playing, they were a good team. When JJ was not playing, they weren't that great of a team. So you pick your first 2 picks in a rebuild, you get a franchise tackle and a franchise edge rusher, you're off to a really, really good start. Now at pick number 14, the Baltimore Ravens' biggest need is interior defensive linemen. They don't have a lot of interior defensive linemen. They don't have a lot of defensive line talent, I would even say, in this roster. They got some good edge rushers. They got some good secondary members. They have a lot of very good players, but they don't have a great impact player up the middle on that defensive line. And because of that, I think Jordan Davis will be the pick. There's not really a cornerback I'd feel comfortable taking at 14. Trent McDuffie, I think, is more of a slot cornerback, which I really don't think is what they're going to be looking at. I think he's either that or a strong safety, right? Andrew Booth, I think, is a very good cornerback, and I think is definitely an option here. But I'm taking a really impactful defensive lineman before I take a secondary player if I'm the Baltimore Ravens, because at the end of the day, they have nobody at that defensive line position. At the very least, their secondary with their cornerbacks, although they get very injured and although they seemed and faced a lot of injuries last year, Marlon Humphrey and Marcus Peters are a very good cornerback duo when they are healthy. And although I think they can address cornerback for that 3rd and 4th spot and for depth, I think if you're going to draft for depth in the 1st round, it doesn't really make a lot of sense, especially top 15, when you have the opportunity to add a full-time starter to your defensive line, right? If the Ravens are healthy, their secondary is very good. If the Ravens are healthy, their defensive line and their penetration up the middle just really isn't. So that's why Jordan Davis is the pick here. Now, Philadelphia is on the clock, and I feel like this is a very common assessment of the Philadelphia Eagles, but I'm going to give them Jameson Williams. Jameson Williams broke out last season at Alabama. He was one of the best wide receivers, and although the Eagles wide receivers got better a season ago, they did not have a single player break 1,000 yards, and they didn't have a lot of wide receivers be huge impact players for them a season ago. I still think addressing wide receiver for the 3rd, 4th year in a row might seem like a little bit of a stretch because they've done it so many times. But if you're telling me that the Eagles have that opportunity to get a big, fast wide receiver, potentially a number 1 wide receiver at pick 15, and potentially the number 1 wide receiver by some people at the 15th overall position, pair him with Devontae Smith and, the rest of, what the Eagles have on offense, you had a big-time playmaker to a playoff team from a season ago. You're doing pretty good for yourself. And linebacker and defensive back can be addressed later in this draft because there's a lot of good linebackers and DBs later in the middle rounds of this class. There's not a lot of big playmakers like Jameson Williams and in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Now, the Saints are on the clock, and I think they also go with a wide receiver as Garrett Wilson, the wide receiver from Ohio State, my wide receiver 1, goes off the board at the 16th overall pick. Michael Thomas is very questionable. Jameis Williams played very well a season ago before getting injured, and I think he is a very good quarterback. I really think with Sean Payton a year ago, he developed a lot. I think the Saints quarterback coach did wonders ironing out some of the flaws that Jameis Winston still had in year 5. He played very well a season ago. Michael Thomas is injury prone. Michael Thomas hasn't played in 2 seasons, right? Antonio Callaway is a good player, but is he really your wide receiver 1? And then your wide receiver 3 is Tre'Quan Smith, who is not a bad receiver, but in my opinion isn't a starting quality wide receiver. So if I'm taking Garrett Wilson, I pair him with Michael Thomas. It's a really good wide receiver duo. It gives Jameis Winston a lot of help, gives him a lot of weaponry to go out and make some plays. I think it's a really good pick for the Saints. I think it's safe. I think it really, either solidifies your wide receiver spot or gives you a true wide receiver 1 if Michael Thomas doesn't return for another year. It just makes a lot of sense for me that for them to go a big-time weapon to help Jameis Winston and maybe address some other positions of need a little bit later, like that tackle position. However, at 17, I do believe that the Chargers will address the tackle position. They were not a great offensive line a season ago, and although Slater was an all-pro as a rookie, the rest of their offensive line wasn't anything special. Their other tackles got beat significantly and very, very often by Max Crosby, by Bradley Chubb, and by the rest of the edge rushers in the AFC West. I think the Chargers double up at tackle back-to-back seasons, and I think with the 17th overall pick, Bernard Raman Bernhard Raimann is your pick. He is a very big player, very big tackle, put up very good numbers, very good testing numbers, is a freakish athlete at the tackle position. I think that the Chargers offensive line coach would be very, very good at addressing this pick. I think he'd be very good at cleaning out some of the flaws that Bernhard has as a tackle from Central Michigan. But overall, I think that the Chargers, they're set on defense after their free agency acquisitions. They're very good on offense with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams and, some of the other weapons they have like Austin Eckler. Their weapons are fine. Justin Herbert's fine. Justin Herbert needs protection. He doesn't need to be running for his life every single play. And I think that's why the Chargers address the offensive tackle. Now at pick 18, I have the Philadelphia Eagles addressing cornerback. And no, it's not Trent McDuffie, but it is one of the top cornerbacks in this class, as Andrew Booth is the pick here at number 18. Andrew Booth is one of the nation's top cornerbacks, is good at man, is good in zone. And I think you put him across from Darius Slay, put Avonte Maddox as your slot or your third guy, and your secondary is pretty talented at that point, right? Their secondary is not super deep. It's not super talented right now outside of Darius Slay. Adding a big-time cornerback addition in the draft to pair with Darius Slay would be huge for the Philadelphia Eagles, addressing one of their biggest positions of need for what seems to be addressing one of their biggest positions of need that's seemingly been there for 5 to 6 years at this point. They finally get a good starting boundary cornerback opposite of Darius Slay. And in today's NFL, every team has two good wide receivers, right? It's not just a one and then you're kind of screwed if that number one's taken away, right? Tampa Bay has 3 really good wide receivers. The Chiefs have multiple receiving options. Any of the top teams, Buffalo has some top receiving options. There isn't just one big weapon. You need a good number 2 on the boundary to play alongside your Pro Bowl, all-pro caliber corner in Darius Slay. And I think Andrew Booth fits what the Eagles want perfectly. And just like that, the Saints are back up on the clock. And with that being the case at pick number 19, I think they address the tackle position. Teron Armstead left them this offseason to go to Miami. They need all the protection. They need all the help that they can get Jameis Winston. They address it with a top wide receiver in the first pick. And with this pick, I think Trevor Penning is the solution. 6'7", 325 pounds, absolute wall of a human being. May not be the all-pro that Teron Armstead was when he left, but he will certainly slide in day one, upgrade the position, and help give Jameis Winston the best chance of success in the NFL. Now at pick number 20, I do think the Steelers address the quarterback position, and I don't think that they're set with Mitch Trubisky. Even though they signed Trubisky, even though they have Mason Rudolph, who they spent a decent third-round pick on a few years ago, I don't think they're set at quarterback. I don't think that Mike Tomlin, after having a Hall of Fame quarterback for multiple years, and after having that Hall of Fame quarterback not play at a Hall of Fame level for multiple years, I really don't think that he's going to go into this season comfortable with Mitch Trubisky. What I think he will be comfortable with is the 6'3", pro-ready quarterback with some mobility in Desmond Ridder. Desmond Ridder is my quarterback 2 in this class, right behind Malik Willis. He has a lot of good tools, reads the game very, very well. Quarterback is a big need for Pittsburgh despite the Mitch Trubisky signing, and Desmond Ridder is now in an opportunity where he is with a playoff team with one of the best coaching staffs in the NFL, one of the better front offices in the NFL, with some decent weapons surrounding him and a good offensive line with arguably the best defense in the division. I think Desmond Ridder can slide in immediately, maybe even play better than what Big Ben was giving you a season ago, and even improve your team by taking this player at the number 2 overall spot. Instead of just patching a hole, Desmond Ridder could very well improve them from a borderline playoff team to a legit conference championship type team if he pans out and if the Steelers can develop him properly. Now, New England was incredibly tough to pick, but as wide receiver was their biggest need, and their wide receivers weren't very good a season ago. I wanted to address wide receiver more than anything, and with that being the case, Chris Olave is a good player, but he just, for me, doesn't really fit with what they're looking for, right? It just, I don't know. I don't have a great reason. Neither does Sky Moore. George Pickens is okay. I think he could fit in there pretty well as well. But I just feel like Treylon Burks is the right pick for New England, right? They need a wide receiver. He obviously plays the wide receiver position. Treylon Burks was looked at as a top player at the end of the college football season, didn't test well, didn't have great measurements, didn't have great numbers, right? And wouldn't it be very Patriot-esque to take that guy that didn't test well, doesn't run a fast 40, maybe doesn't even seem like he should be a top first-round pick at this point, and still take him with that first-round pick and turn him into something special? It just seems like that's the destiny for Treylon Burks, right? After not testing, after falling down these draft boards, it just seems like a Patriots type thing to take the guy that's falling on the draft boards and turn him into a star in the NFL. With wide receiver being the biggest need and Treylon Burks being the most dynamic weapon, I think Treylon Burks is the pick here at 21. It addresses need, and I think he is the best fit for the New England Patriots. Now at 22, this pick was very hard to put in because this is honestly my worst nightmare. But I think Chris Olave is your Davante Adams replacement. I think he's the best route runner. I think he's the best separator in this class. You lost your wide receiver 1. You lost that separator. You lost arguably the best route runner in the NFL. You replace him with the best route runner in this class. I would hate to see this happen, but it makes too much sense not to put this pick through. Now at 23, the Arizona Cardinals, I have them addressing offensive line. DeAndre Hopkins is returning. AJ Green is returning. James Conner is returning. That defense is returning with some really good players on it. The offensive line was not good in Arizona a season ago. As you can see, their biggest needs are guard and center and defensive line and cornerback. I'm going to give them a guard. I'm going to give them Kenyon Green, the offensive guard from Texas A&M. He is, in my opinion, either the best or one of the best guards in the entire draft class. I think he's actually my highest graded guard, and I think he'd slide in very well. Give Kyler Murray more time, give him more protection right up the middle. And in a division with Aaron Donald, you're going to want a top quality guard to go up against Aaron Donald at least twice a season. Now the Dallas Cowboys are on the board, and their biggest need is either offensive or defensive line. The offensive line isn't great. Like, the offensive tackles at this point aren't very good, and that's what they would really need to replace. So instead of that, I'm going to give them a defensive line help, and I am going to give them Devonte Wyatt, the defensive lineman from Georgia. Some people argue that he is better than his teammate Jordan Davis. I think he's less impactful, but I also think he gives you more 3-down viability. The Cowboys have stars on their defense, so they have stars on their roster. I think Dak and Zeke and Gallup and CeeDee Lamb can be fine, and Tony Pollard can be fine on offense. That defense was good a season ago, but it wasn't necessarily a great defense a season ago. And I think adding a really good run stopper defensive lineman that can plug up the middle, allowing Tank Lawrence to get home a little bit more often, is going to help the Dallas Cowboys succeed a lot. Now, this pick is one I haven't seen talked about a ton, but it's one that makes a lot of sense to me, and that would be with the Buffalo Bills having their biggest need honestly be at running back. Kenneth Walker is a phenomenal running back. Him or Bryce Hall are almost unanimously looked at as the top 2 running backs in this class. The Buffalo Bills had a top passing attack a season ago. They had statistically the #1 defense a season ago. They haven't had a great running game since Josh Allen has been there. They've had, Devin Singletary. They've had Zach Moss. They've had some okay running backs, but they haven't had a top tier guy. And I think adding a running back at the 25th overall spot could benefit them very well. Stephon Diggs is still there. Dylan Gabriel, who had 4 touchdowns in the playoff game, is still there. Their tight end, who's very good, is still there. That offensive line is still very strong. I think adding a running back early in this class and adding maybe the best pure runner in this draft, Kenneth Walker, to me, makes the most sense. Yes, running back is maybe not the biggest position that you address in the first round, but if you're the Buffalo Bills, you have the luxury to take that pick because you don't really have needs anywhere else, right? You're kind of set everywhere else on your offense and defense. So you now have the luxury at 25 to take a running back, add another dimension to your football team, and make your football team better in the process. Now, the Tennessee Titans are on the clock, and they are in peril of losing A.J. Brown. And with that being the case, Jalen Tolbert is the last guy on this list that reminds me the most of A.J. Brown. He's, I believe, 6'1", maybe 6'2", has pretty good contact balance, has really good yard after the catch ability, and he played at Southern Alabama. but he's just a very, very good football player. And I think Jalen Tolbert will sneak into the first round. I think he'll be one of those sneaky first-round wide receivers that goes off the clock, or that goes off the board earlier than a lot of people think. I think he's a very good A.J. Brown replacement if they don't feel comfortable in bringing him back. And if they do, having a second A.J. Brown and having a second guy across from him now that Julio Jones is no longer there is something that I think would be in the best interest of retooling that team and giving Ryan Tannehill some more weapons to work with so they're not as one-dimensional if Derrick Henry gets hurt again. Now, the Buccaneers are on the clock at 27, and this pick was pretty simple. They're stacked everywhere except for the offensive line. Their offensive line got abused by the Rams in the playoffs. Zion Johnson's the best tackle available. You take Zion Johnson from Boston College. You turn the pick in immediately. You don't turn back. You don't think about it. It's over. It's done. He's your guy. I think he's the best offensive lineman left. I think he's the best fit for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. You give Brady a little bit more protection. Their biggest needs are interior offensive line. I think it makes the most sense in this context. Now, 28, I have George Karlaftis going to the Green Bay Packers. I didn't know what to do with this pick. The offensive line talent isn't there. I don't think they're going to double up at wide receiver after signing Sammy Watkins in free agency. But George Karlaftis seems like somebody they could add. They lost Zadarius Smith, one of their bigger pass rushers a season ago, and I think you could bring in George Karlaftis, play him in some different roles, play him in some different packages, and try to develop him into what a lot of college scouts think he can be in the NFL. I think it helps you replace one of your biggest losses in the free agency market while addressing it with somebody that at the beginning of the season, or at the beginning of, the draft season, a lot of people thought could even go as high as top 10 in the NFL draft. Again, he didn't produce to me, but he's also extremely young, extremely new to the game of football. And if you told me 2 or 3 years down the line, he puts it all together and is one of the top edge rushers in the NFL, I wouldn't be surprised. Now, moving on to the Kansas City Chiefs, they lost Tyreek Hill. They lost almost all of their wide receivers. The guy that, to me, that is the most Tyreek Hill-esque is Sky Moore. Being 5'10", really shifty, really good at change of direction, really good at yard after the catch, having a really good, I believe, low 4.4 40. He's like a 4.41 40-yard dash. He is very quick, very explosive. I think he replaces Tyreek Hill the best in this class. And quite honestly, I think that he is the best fit for the Kansas City Chiefs. But the Chiefs pick back-to-back as they also pick at pick 30, and I think Trent McDuffie is the pick. They lost Tyrann Mathieu a season ago. Their cornerbacks haven't been anything outstanding for a while now, and I think that Trent McDuffie can either play safety, I think he could play cornerback. Either two of those roles, I think he will succeed, but I think if they transition him to safety and play him in a role like they had Tyrann Mathieu in, I think they could do really, really big things in the 2022 NFL season. Now, Cincinnati's on the clock, and although I think a lot of people would have them addressing interior offensive line, there isn't really an interior offensive lineman. There isn't really an interior offensive lineman that I think they would feel comfortable drafting at this spot. I think they can wait and add a little more. And even if they don't, I think their offensive line is still in a very good spot after their offseason moves. But where they really got hurt in the Super Bowl was at the cornerback position, right? Eli Apple, for what he did this season, he was a good football player. But to me, he just isn't that guy. And I really, really think that Roger McCreary is the best pick here. He is the best cornerback I have graded out of the rest of these players. I'm not going off of PFF grade, by the way. I'm going off of my personal grades and what I think about these players. And I think Roger McCreary is the best player available at this point. He's a very good cornerback. He's not the biggest guy, but I mean, I think the best way to describe him is he shouldn't work. He's not big. He's not long. He's not even extremely physically gifted, but he's just a good football player, and it works for him. He just covers very well, is very sticky in coverage, and gets a lot of passes defended when he really probably shouldn't. But I think they address cornerback here. I think it's one of their underrated needs in this class. They upgraded offensive line a ton, and I think cornerback could be a big addition for this team. And one of the big reasons that they lost Super Bowl 56 was because of the cornerback play not being able to really cover Robert Woods, or not being able to really cover Cooper Kupp or Odell Beckham or Van Jefferson for a large majority of that game. And then with that being the case, Devin Lloyd is still on the board at 32. And I know some people might say, okay, that's a little biased. The Detroit Lions need a linebacker. It's biased that you put them there. I really don't think so. I've seen a lot of mock drafts where Devin Lloyd goes 32 or even sometimes 33 to the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think linebacker is an underrated position. I don't think it's a position that will get addressed incredibly highly in this class. And if you look at it, right, Buffalo, I don't think it'll get addressed before 20. I think the earliest you could see Devin Lloyd go off the board is probably 23 to Arizona, but the Cowboys don't need a linebacker. The Bills don't need a linebacker. The Titans don't really need a linebacker. The Bucs definitely don't need a linebacker, nor do the Green Bay Packers. The Chiefs, yeah, you could probably address linebacker, but I think they have bigger needs and bigger worries. And then the Bengals don't really need a linebacker either. And I don't think it's because he's I don't think it's because he's not a top 32 player. I just think because of the position, the Detroit Lions would I just think because of the positional value, according to a lot of teams, Devin Lloyd will fall to the bottom of the first round. I'm not the only person who think this, but I think if he does fall to 32, he will be a huge pickup for the Detroit Lions at the bottom of the third. And you might say, okay, when will the Lions address wide receiver? When will the Lions address edge rusher? Boye Mafa is still available. David Ojabo is still available. Drake Jackson's still available. George Pickens is still available. Christian Watson is still available. There's still a ton of talent going into the second round of the NFL draft. And with that being the case, I think that you could still see a lot of good talent go off the board for some of the other top teams in the second round. But this is how I have the draft laid out as of right now. This is my 32-team full mock draft from pick 1 to pick 32, doing my best to put fit and talent all together to come up with a 32-team first-round mock draft, and this is how it came about. Now, again, I know trades are going to happen. I know trades are inevitable, but at the end of the day, that would make things a little bit too messy, and I think this is how the first round will play out roughly if there were no trades. So with all that being said, that is all I have for you guys today. Let me know down in the comments below, what do you think about this mock draft? How do you feel about your team? How do you think your team did in this mock draft? And if this first round came through, and if this first round came true, how would you feel about your team's selection? I'd be very curious what you guys think. But with all of that being said, that is all for you guys today. Thank you all so very much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions.